We're going to talk about the appointment of Mr. Gorsuch and the future of the court. And joining us is Byron Henry. Byron's a partner in the appellate law section of Scheef and Stone. He focuses on the areas of business litigation and civil appeals. He's filed papers with briefs in numerous state and federal trial and appellate courts, including the Supreme Court of the United States, the Supreme Court of Texas, the Fifth and Sixth Courts circuits, and successfully argued cases in a number of Texas courts of appeals. Mr. Henry, thanks for joining us.
Glad to be with you.
Where do we find you today? Are you somewhere in Texas?
Yes, I am. I'm sitting just north of Dallas in a suburb called Frisco, Texas.
Frisco, Texas. I've never heard of Frisco.
That's where the Dallas Cowboys just built their world headquarters. I'm looking at it out my window.
Is that right? That must be
That's
nice.
Right.
You must be a huge Cowboy fan.
I am, but don't hold that against me.
Well, we're
I was going to say, that's all the time we have
that's
for
all the time we have for Cowboys. That's all. Sorry about that. What's your general impression when you heard the appointment?
Well, since Donald Trump released that list of 21 potential nominees to the Supreme Court back in the campaign, there were a few that kind of rose to the top as kind of the cream of the crop. And regardless of who you spoke with, Neil Gorsuch was in that group, and of course he did make the finals, and of course now we know he is the nominee. And what we know about him is just he's a mild-mannered Westerner who loves the outdoors, good family man, and he's young, 49 years old, appointed to the Court of Appeals at around 39, which is extremely young for a Court of Appeals judge in the federal system. And he reveres Justice Scalia, and according to everything he's written and his speeches, seems to be in a conservative mold along the same lines of the justice that he's going to replace, Anthony Scalia.
One of the attributes of Scalia that I think Mr. Gorsuch admired, and I think will certainly parallel, is the idea of reading the Constitution as it was written. Very little interpretation. Is that a good thing or a bad thing, in your opinion?
Well, I mean, it just depends on where you stand on the political spectrum and what results you're looking at a certain case. But certainly from a principled standpoint and a conservative view of both the law and the Constitution, the originalist theory, which is basically the Constitution means what the framers intended it to mean at the time it was adopted, and if we outgrow the Constitution or our society needs change, such as the women's right to vote or the income tax, the way that occurs is through the constitutional amendment process and not through justices or judges who believe that the country has just outgrown certain parts of the Constitution, and so they can just kind of import their own meaning to the terms in modern-day America as opposed to the way it was intended when it was drafted and ratified. And that is really something that Judge Gorsuch, hopefully Justice Gorsuch in the future, has hung his hat on.
Yeah.
That originalist style of interpretation that was basically brought out of the shadows by Antonin Scalia and the Federalist Society. I mean, the entire Federalist Society was basically born of this new wave of conservative approach to judging and to reading the Constitution and statutes, and it really hangs all on Justice Scalia, and I believe that Justice Gorsuch is one of those disciples.
Attorney Byron Henry is our guest. One of my favorite phrases, Mr. Henry, because I think it's good and sometimes it's bad, is you never know. You never know. And one of the things, I'm not that old. I mean, I'm old, but I'm not that old, that I can't remember how judges performed in the 30s and the 40s and the 50s. But it seems to me in the 80s and the 90s, there's been a trend that you never really know until you know where a judge is going to go. And one of the things that I've heard about this Mr. Gorsuch, I don't know if you've met him or not, but that he's a cajoler, that he can convince people to get on his side. And I think we need to aim him at Anthony Kennedy and John Roberts. Is he a guy that can perhaps swing these somewhat, I don't know what I'd call these guys, moderates or sometimes betrayer of conservative viewpoints? Can he sway them back to our side?
Well, one of the good things about Justice Gorsuch is instead of picking what's been known as a stealth pick or someone with very little paper trail or very little speeches
right.
or whatnot, Donald Trump basically has the best of both worlds. He has someone with a paper trail, someone he can measure his speeches and his writings and his law reviews up against the conservative record, but
yeah, but
he's not bombastic or someone that is really said things or
Right.
written things that are just completely ticked off the other side. Now, as far as the cajoler, I mean, he is going to be a junior justice, and he is only 49.
True.
So I don't want to get ahead of myself about how much influence he's going to have.
Right.
But I will tell you, he is very convincing. He writes well.
Yeah.
That's another attribute with Scalia. And one other note, some people know it, some people don't, but he was Justice Anthony Kennedy's clerk.
I didn't know that.
And so this will be the first time in history that a clerk will serve with the former justice, the justice that they formerly clerked for.
Wow.
So whether Kennedy has an influence on Gorsuch or they both kind of have an influence on one another because of a friendship when Gorsuch was a young lawyer, that is a dynamic that we will wait and see how that plays out over the first couple terms if and when Gorsuch gets on the court.
That really is. Byron Henry, our guest partner in the appellate law section of Scheef and Stone. One of the things I think is also going to be fascinating to watch, because this man is, you can argue that he's been to three of the best schools on the planet: Columbia, Harvard, Oxford. I don't see how they bag on him there, but it's going to be fascinating to see how they line up against this man and where they attack. Where do you see the front coming?
Well, I see the attack coming in two ways. One, there's going to be a group of senators that actually have, I believe, a modicum of decency and reverence for the system and for the country, and they will not make it a personal attack on Judge Gorsuch. What they will do is they will basically say that this is political. It's not about Judge Gorsuch. We think he's a fine jurist and a fine man, but because the Republicans obstructed and, quote, stole this seat from Merrick Garland and President Obama, we're going to retaliate in kind, and it has nothing to do with Gorsuch. So there's a group that will do that. But then there's another group, egged on by radicals from the left and people that basically fill in the blank. No matter who you nominate, they're going to say that they're a racist and they hate women and they hate the poor and they love corporations and big money. They're going to say that about anybody, regardless of who the name was drawn. There'll be some senators that take that approach and basically say that he's out of the mainstream, he's crazy, he wants women not to be able to terminate their pregnancies, he's against reproductive rights. You know how they phrase all that.
Right.
So there'll be a small group there, but I just don't think that is going to carry the day. I believe he will not only be confirmed, but I think ultimately, after all said and done at the hearings, he'll probably get more than 60 votes. So my guess is 35 Democratic senators vote against, and the vote is somewhere around 65-35, which means the filibuster, all this talk about that, is probably not only premature, but probably never going to come to pass.
I hope not. Byron Henry, our guest. Mr. Henry, where did you graduate from law school?
I went to what is now Texas A&M University School of Law in Fort Worth, Texas.
A very fine school. Does it not bother you that you are all but eliminated from being on the Supreme Court, because now all the members not only are Ivy League schools, but everybody except Ginsburg either went to Harvard or Yale? I don't know why, but that bugs me.
Well, and Ginsburg actually did go to Harvard. She just didn't go to Harvard Law School. She went to Harvard. She went to Columbia Law School. So she actually has Harvard in her blood. So I guess they just bumped her in. But yeah, I like it here in Texas, and I'm not too ticked off that I'm disqualified from the Supreme Court. Before Judge Gorsuch's nomination, there were no Protestants on the Supreme Court.
Is that right?
A Protestant. So if you count Episcopalian as Protestant, which I think most people do, he'll be the first Protestant on the Supreme Court. Not the first,
right?
Only of this group, because we have 3 Jewish members and right now 5 Catholics. So he would be a Protestant. So
very, very interesting. If you had 3 things that this court addressed first Monday in October, so to speak, what would those 3? And please put them in priority.
Well, I mean, as a conservative and somebody who reveres the Constitution, my number one thing is separation of powers. Do not let the president, whether it's Trump or Barack Obama, overstep their bounds on executive orders or usurping the power that they were given in the Constitution. I would rather the Constitution be used to draw the lines and let us decide within the lines. So some people say abortion, some people say gay marriage, but I always say if you get the structure right, if you get the lines drawn between the branches in the federal and the state government, then you get the other stuff plays out in the political branches, and you can fight there, and that usually comes out the right way. So I'd say, first of all, enforce the separation of powers between the branches and the federal and state government in federalism. And then secondly, I mean, I do think that the abortion decision, taking the rights away from the states, and the abortion decision basically overturning Texas's abortion restrictions on abortion clinics last year was just completely unfounded in the Constitution and just rogue. So I would like to see them revisit the rogue decisions such as of this abortion decisions. And lastly, number 3, I'd like for them to finally put a stop to this end run around gun restrictions where they're saying, well, we're not banning guns, we're just making it almost impossible for you to buy them or carry them. I believe you should either fish or cut bait. If the Second Amendment is a constitutional individual right to bear arms for self-defense, then the Supreme Court should enforce it that way and quit hedging, and if it's not, they should say so. So I would like them to draw a definitive line so states and localities know what they can and can't do with respect to people's right to bear arms.
All three of those would get the GOP convention up on its feet and giving you a standing ovation. But will that address the problems of the nation? You don't mention immigration. I guess in some respects you mention Obamacare, because I believe if we do strengthen the separate branches, we'll discover that John Roberts made a mistake and that, in fact, you cannot constitutionally mandate anything. The government cannot tell me to buy anything, whether it's pencils, Obamacare, or crayons. So I guess in that respect you address Obamacare, but don't we have to broaden out and address some other major issues, including immigration?
Well, here's the thing about immigration. If you read the Constitution, which a lot of people are talking about, this immigration orders being unlawful over the weekend, the Constitution gives plenary authority. When I say plenary, all authority over immigration matters. If you're not a citizen, whether you vacation here, whether you work here, you go to school here, regardless of why you come to this country, if you're not a citizen, plenary authorities in Congress. Courts have said that. Everyone knows it. They've delegated some authority to the president to implement the law, but the Supreme Court doesn't really have a whole lot to say about immigration unless the president steps out of line under the separation of powers or not. And Congress does not have to change the law on immigration. People want them to. It's their prerogative. They'll do so when they choose. Donald Trump has no right to violate the law or implement new immigration laws, and neither did Barack Obama.
Yep.
Congress makes the law. Donald Trump enforces it as president, just like conservatives argued that President Obama should have done when he was president.
Yeah,
and that's the separation of powers issue that should easily keep the president in his sphere and Congress in their sphere.
Absolutely. Hear, hear. Well said, sir. Byron Henry, our guest. Mr. Henry, thanks so much for taking the time. Final. Who do you like Sunday?
Well, I want Atlanta to win just because they've never won it, but I don't think good money is ever betting against Bill Belichick and Tom Brady. So if I was betting, I'd bet on the Patriots, but I'll be rooting for the Falcons.
I'm with you 100%. How are you going to bet against Belichick with 2 weeks to prepare? Just don't make no sense.
I agree with that.
All right, sir. Thanks so much for talking with us. We appreciate you taking the time.
My pleasure.
Take care. Byron Henry. He was outstanding. I enjoyed that. I didn't necessarily agree. I think we do have to face up immigration. I liked how he talked about the separation of the three branches.